Greetings, booktubers. Today, we are going to answer the question, is Jack of Shadows, the novel by Roger Zelazny, is it good, is it bad, or is it something in between? And the answer to that question is yes, yes it is. Greetings, booktubers. Welcome back to Grammaticus Books. And today on Grammaticus Books, we're going to discuss Jack of Shadows by Roger Zelazny. Now, I originally talked about this book about 2 weeks ago during a reading report. And at that time, I punted the football down the field in terms of giving a final verdict on it because I wanted to go back. I wanted to reread some of the chapters in here. I wanted to mull it over a little bit further before I rendered an opinion on the book. I wanted to give it a fair shake. And I've done that. So today here, we're going to go over the book and then I'm going to give you what my opinion is on the Jack of Shadows. So this book was published in 1971. It's 207 pages. It's very thin. And when it was published, it was nominated for both a Hugo and a Locus Award. But most famously, it is known for being a first draft, meaning Roger Zelazny wrote this book here completely in one take. He just wrote it in one take. He never went back. He never changed a single word. He never edited a single paragraph. And he just sent it off to the publisher, and then the publisher printed it as is. Now, I will say there are parts of this book here when you're reading it where it does read like a first draft. And I think Zelazny would have been better served to go back and maybe polish those parts a little bit. But it is interesting that he did this all in one draft and one take. So what is this book about? It is an epic, dark, high fantasy novel that is shot through with elements of science fiction that have been fused into the plot. In other words, it is quintessential Roger Zelazny. And I think these types of plots, these type of books here by Zelazny, I'm going to label them ZELANTASYs. So it is a classic ZELANTASY novel by Roger Zelazny here about this character, Jack of Shadows. Jack of Shadows, and just a warning, there will be some spoilers going forward. I will have some spoilers here in this review, but nothing earth-shattering. But the main character, Jack of Shadows, or as he's also known, Jack of Lies, and by the end of the book, he's known as the Jack of Evil. He is a being who was born in the littoral zone of this world, and the world is tidally locked, meaning it doesn't rotate. So one hemisphere is perpetually facing the sun, and the other hemisphere is always in the dark side. And it's known as the light side and the dark side. And the light side of this world is ruled by science and reason, and the dark side is ruled by magic. And on the dark side, you have dark lords who have these special abilities, these ultimate magical powers. Those powers are most prominent in certain geographic locations on the dark side of the hemisphere. And these dark lords have to find that focal point, that geographic location. And once they've found it, then they build their dark citadels of power, and they try to expand their influence out from that foci, that magical foci point. But the strongest and most powerful of these dark lords is a being called the Lord of Bats. And he can control all the bats on this world, and he has magical powers that allow him to change himself into any shape that he wants. He can drain the life force out of any being on the planet. And if this sounds remarkably like Dracula, you would be correct because it is Dracula. I'm utterly convinced that Zelazny has put Dracula into the book here, and he's made Dracula the main antagonist against his hero, his anti-hero, Jack of Shadows. So that is the world. What's the plot of the book? And again, there will be some spoilers going forward. The plot is that Jack of Shadows, is a rogue. He's a master rogue. He's a master thief. And he uses his powers of shadow in order to traverse over to the light side and the dark side, because not being actually a light sider or a dark sider, having been born in the realm of shadow, this littoral zone, he can freely go back and forth between these two worlds. And the two worlds don't interact. They barely know about each other. They only know about each other as myth and legend. But Jack can travel back and forth, and he uses that ability and his shadow ability in order to steal the most powerful and magical items and beautiful items that exist on the planet. And that's where the book kicks off. So Jack is in the process of attempting to steal one of these items, and it goes horribly wrong. So this isn't much more than what you can glean off of the back blurb of the book, but it is a little bit of a spoiler here. He gets caught in the opening pages of the book trying to steal this item. trying to use his rogue-like powers in order to obtain it, and he gets killed. They chop his head off. But Jack doesn't have lives as a normal being. He shares a feature with the Darksiders in that they don't die a normal death. When they're killed, they are reincarnated, and they're reincarnated back on the dark side of the planet, and they are reincarnated in the dung pits of Glive. So they go to the dung pits of Glive on the dark side of the earth. They are reconstituted, utterly naked, completely vulnerable, and they have to travel back there to their citadel of power, their location of power, in order to rebuild. And it's an extremely perilous and hazardous journey. And that's how the book starts off. And once Jack is killed, he swears vengeance upon the people who had him executed. And the rest of the novel follows Jack as he goes down this trail, this path of revenge against these individuals. And as the book goes on in its chapters, his circle of people upon which he wants to execute revenge grows and grows until it actually encompasses the entire world, and he wants to destroy this world utterly, or at least destroy it in terms of how the Lightsiders and Darksiders perceive their world. He wants to bring that world to an end, and that's all I'm going to say about that point. And this is the story, this is the book, and it follows Jack down this journey, and it gets darker and darker and darker as it goes until Jack assumes the mantle, the epithet of Jack of Evil. And he is utterly evil. He's an anti-hero. There's nothing that he won't do, and nobody that he will kill. He kills people without remorse. And as he's coming closer to obtaining his goal of bringing this world to an end, in this Wagnerian Armageddon that he's attempting to bring about, his soul finds him, which is interesting because Darksiders don't have souls. Only Lightsiders have souls, but they only have one life. And the Darksiders have their multiple lives, and exactly how many is a highly guarded secret, but they're divested of souls. So Jack has his reincarnations and he has a soul. So he shares these two properties between light side and dark side. And his soul materializes and starts harassing him as he gets closer and closer to his goal of total evil, this total destruction. And right at the end of the book, Roger Zelazny, through this grim, dark, high epic fantasy that he's created, this ZELANTASY, all of a sudden at the end of the book, you get this ray of sunshine, this ray of light that beams down with a possible redemption arc with Jack of Shadows through the one friend that he has cultivated during the course of the book. And that friend is Lucifer. So, yes, his one friend is Satan. He's known as Morning Star. He looks just like Satan. He has the bat-like wings, the barbed tail, all of that. And he's embedded in rock, waiting for a sunrise that never comes. And it's the one person that he befriends throughout the book. And Morning Star is just another name. It's a nickname for Lucifer. So Lucifer is his one friend in the book. And at the very end, as all these plot points are sort of coming to a head, he has a possible redemption arc through this friendship. And I'm going to leave it right there. That is basically the book in a nutshell. So what did I think about this epic, dark fantasy with all of this science fiction that has been infused into it, this quintessential ZELANTASY that we have going on here with Jack of Shadows? Well, it depends. It is definitely what you would call new wave science fiction and fantasy. That is the new wave that took hold in 1970, where these stories stopped focusing on the plot. They weren't plot driven. They weren't using their fantasy settings and their science fiction technology in order to overcome obstacles. That's not the focus of those books. It's not the focus of this book. Rather, what Zelazny is focused upon is the mental and emotional state of Jack and the people around Jack, and how the events that progress here in this high fantasy world that he's created, how they affect and change that mental and emotional state. That is, by and large, virtually 100% the focal point of this book and what this book is about, and what that effect has upon him and upon the people around him and the people who he used to love at the start of the book. Now, if that sounds appealing to you, if you like new wave science fiction, if you like a dark high fantasy novel, you are probably going to like this book. And from that perspective, I would rate this book as an 8 out of 10. I wouldn't rate it any higher than that because it is very unpolished in parts. It could have used an editing. It could have used being reworked instead of just being submitted as a first draft. But it's very interesting from that perspective. And so from that perspective, from a new wave science fiction fantasy book, I give it a solid 8 out of 10 and do recommend it if that is the sort of thing that you like to read. Now, if you prefer your science fiction and fantasy to be straightforward, to be plot driven, with your characters overcoming obstacles that have been placed in front of them, using this new science fiction that has been put into the book, or the aspects of the and vectors of these high fantasy worlds that have been created by the authors, then this probably is not your cup of tea, and it's probably going to be more close to like a 6 out of 10 on a rating scale, and you're probably not going to enjoy it. I'm sort of in between there. I do like plot-driven books, but I can appreciate a well-written new wave science fiction. For me personally, this would come in somewhere around a 7 or a 7.5. That's where I would place it on the Grammatica scale. So that's the book. That's my review of it. If you've read this book, I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. But also, what was the influence that this book here had upon his future writings and upon other authors and other creators? And the answer is very little, at least at first, because this was a one-off. Roger Zelazny never went back. He never revisited this world that he created. And that's a shame, because this is a really interesting high fantasy world that Zelazny has put down on the page here in 1971. And there's a lot of meat on the bone he could have worked with this tidally locked world with its two hemispheres of light and darkness, of science and magic. It has a lot of potential for a lot of great storytelling, but he never went back to it. That is until 1978. And in 1978, in this graphic novel here, which is a collaboration between Roger Zelazny and the artist Gray Morrow, who's a fantastic artist. Here's the back of the illustrated Roger Zelazny. Roger Zelazny writes a story for the graphic novel, a short graphic novel story for it, and Gray Morrow illustrates it, and it's called Shadow Jack. And you get a straightforward, plot-driven story arc set in that fantasy world, and it's absolutely wonderful. But you have to have the illustrated Roger Zelazny in order to read it. If you come across this graphic novel here, I highly recommend it. It's really good book. It's got a lot of variety in terms of creations that Roger Zelazny has written about over the course of his career, that Gray Morrow, a very talented artist, puts up here and puts onto the page and brings to life in just a fantastic manner. Highly recommended. The other influence that Jack of Shadows had was on the game Dungeons and Dragons. It was a huge influence on Gary Gygax, and famously, in the Dungeon Master's Guide for the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons rule books, written by Gary Gygax, in the Appendix N of this book, Gary Gygax listed out all the books that had the biggest influence upon him when he was creating Dungeons and Dragons. And in that list, on page 224, as I flip to it, inspirational reading. These are readings and educational reading that inspired Gary Gygax. At the bottom of it, down here, in all capital letters, in Appendix N, you have Jack of Shadows. And Jack of Shadows, the rogue character, I'm convinced here that Zelazny creates in 1971, this magical rogue thief character became the archetype for the rogue character class in Dungeons & Dragons. So it had an impact. It had a big impact here in D&D, in that game going forward, which is just a phenomenal game. It's a revolutionary game that was created by Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax. But that is Jack of Shadows. That's my opinion on it. If you've read it, I'd love to hear what your opinion on it is. Put it down in the comments section. It's new wave, epic, high dark fantasy with science fiction shot through, fused into it. It is a prime example of ZELANTASY in action. It's very, very dark. It has a very, very interesting world that he's created. There was one chapter in here that I really liked quite a bit. My favorite chapter is where Jack of Shadows winds up in a duel to the death with a sentient rock. Yes, he's in a duel to the death with a pet rock, is what it essentially comes down to. And it's very well written. But that's it. With that, I'm going to wrap this one up. And I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I will catch you guys next time.